Hi, I'm Denise.
And I'm Tom.
And welcome to our podcast, Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
We created our podcast for you, our nonprofit colleagues. As nonprofit professionals with over 50 years of experience combined, we've led nonprofit hospitals, university programs, campaigns that have transformed cities, communities, and campuses. We're from Chicago and Detroit, and now we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our work has taken us across the country from the Midwest to Seattle, to Portland, California, and nationally. We've seen it, lived it, and have learned from it.
We've all been through a lot as nonprofit professionals, and we hear you, we see you, and we understand. We know you, too, are used to wearing many hats. It can be exhausting, but we come together with the shared mission to transform the world. Because We've Been in Your Shoes is a podcast for you, us, and our entire nonprofit community, sharing and learning from one another so we can continue to innovate and unleash capacity for good. We'll hear from colleagues and peers, discuss emerging issues in the sector, and provide you with key takeaways and useful tips to support you in all you do. We believe that people and philanthropy equal possibilities. Join us on the Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast with new topics and special guests. Thank you for joining us. And here's where we left off.
So, let's face it, there are organizations out there.
But we don't take commission as fundraisers. We don't take commission. So,
Well, I'm not just talking about fundraisers, right? I'm talking about, look at some of the organizations I think about.
just in general. Yeah, all positions.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what would you say then to people that are working for those companies? And here's where I'm going at, folks. My mother was a single mother from another country growing up here. She had 2 boys. Incredible. And the bottom line was she needed to get those boys fed. Now, this is, of course, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? We know much better now. But again, we do have people out there that's the bottom line is, I got to get my kids fed, or I got to make sure we have a warm bed, a house. So for them, they may not have the luxury of making those choices. However, I will push back even on myself. Is like, you still have the luxury of reflection on those things and thinking about next steps and how do you move towards those organizations that you could still get those things accomplished and still make what you need to make to keep your family at least comfortable as you make more changes. So I'll say that. But again, we know some reality of it is that some people don't think that way. So I'll recommend this. My first recommendation would be, if you ever feel that you're in these situations, who do you talk to? How do you reflect on those things? Sometimes you need to go talk to someone, and hopefully your organizations provide those counseling resources for you. But I would suggest that you're not in it by yourself. You have to talk to someone. Denez, what are your thoughts about that long thing I just said?
Yeah, I think you have to prioritize that. That's also maintaining that life-work balance. As you're saying, life-work balance. How do you maintain it too? You and I talked about saying no.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that no doesn't mean you're not going to get the promotion. No doesn't mean you're not going to excel professionally. The other thing is flexibility in how you respond to your work and how you expect others to respond to their work. So it's one thing to, I think, say, I'm going to do this for myself. And then humans are emotional first. Everything is emotional. Our emotions drive how we respond and how we react to each other, but how we engage with each other. And so oftentimes we might say, I'm going to practice more flexibility. I'm going to prioritize this. At 5 o'clock, just because I unplug from work doesn't mean I'm going to stop. And maybe I don't want people to contact me after 5, and I want to communicate that. But oftentimes, as leaders and managers, we oftentimes can be judgy about others, and we start erasing those boundaries, and then we might find ourselves that we're texting and communicating and we're asking staff to follow up with X, Y, and Z, and it's already 6:30 in the evening or 7, and so already we didn't respect that boundary. And so I think we also, if everyone's modeling those values and modeling that environment of how you want to work and prioritize, you can be a little bit more successful and help contribute to that ability to stay in a life work balance mindset. Um, and you can carry that to another job, but being able to know that, how do I respond to others who are trying to also create a life work balance mindset? We have to stop judging each other. Are they really, like, are they really off the clock at 5? Can I really contact them? Like, what are the, I can't do X, Y, and Z. I need their response. And that immediacy of response also, we need to stop doing that too.
But, and it starts at the very top. I can tell you that many times I've said to past people that have reported up to me, like, you don't need to respond to this. I may send an email out, blah, blah, blah. So I send an email out. It may be after 6. It may be something that came up on my mind, like, oh, I have to remember this. So let me send out an email, even on the Saturday. I've done that in the past. Well, and then I get a response. And my response to them is like, why do you respond to me? I just want you to know this. But one team member years ago pushed back. They're like, you're the person I report to. You send an email out, I'm going to respond. So it was a moment for me to really think about that. I'm like, okay, I'm setting a tone. So I need to now stop sending emails on the weekends, which I didn't do a lot, but
Sure.
sometimes things will pop into my head.
Yeah.
And I need to stop at 6 o'clock. I made a decision. I don't send any more emails after 6. I don't send emails when someone's on vacation. Sometimes I'll forget, but I try not to send emails when someone's on vacation. Sometimes in my own team, I won't know if someone else outside, but I try not to do that. But I'll circle back to little tips I found out, and now I've thought about this myself. But I want to ask you something. What we kind of started off this way, but what does life work balance means? So we start off a little bit that way. What does it mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? And I'll read it, just a general definition. We often think about work life balance as the trade off between time spent at work and time spent on other non work activities. In an ideal world, basically what they're saying in this article is that at 5 or 6 o'clock, when you go home, it stops. You're not responding anymore. We know that's not true, especially now that many people work from home.
Yeah. Hard to separate that
So
space.
that has
Yeah.
been blurred a little bit now. But that is what they're saying work life balance is that at
Hmm.
one point, when you're off the clock, you should be off the clock. Salary people, that's
Exempt.
hard.
Yeah.
Exempt, yep, exempt people are that's challenging. And again, working from home has blurred some stuff. So thinking about those things, what does life work balance means to you, Dinesh?
So, life work balance for me really is about prioritizing all the influences that impact my life and life decisions, recognizing that work is a significant influencer in what that quality of life looks like for me. So, I pull work and my professional commitments into the same bucket as my family, as my interests and hobbies. And so in that shuffle, I look at where I want to emphasize, and I change this, definitely if there's a deadline coming up for work, or there's a huge event, or there's some activities. I also like to plan ahead, and so I use my calendar as a tool to help me also think about what months am I going to need to lean in more into my priority bucket, which is my family, and what months I'm going to need to shift a little bit, maybe 20% or 30% more into my professional. And so I start to see where the balance is. And it's hard to not fall back into the cycle of work dictating where my priorities are all the time. So for me, it's like identifying that life, activities, and priorities should dictate how you navigate and where your work continues to influence your ability and your interests. And then I think once you have that, I find that I enjoy what I do. I love the nonprofit space. I love talking about social impact. I love talking about how to raise more money. I love talking about capital campaigns and development coaching. I love all that stuff and thinking about how do we innovate the field. But when I bring that into my pleasure reading, my personal interests, involvement in my kids' schools or their programs, anything that they're involved in, and then also in my culture and my cultural organization, I start to see how they connect back to the work I do. So that's how I define it, is how do I bring my work into my same bucket as my life, not make them compete, but recognize some of my work commitments might ebb and flow, and every month might be a little different, but I'm okay with that. But the hard practice is to continue to maintain that mindset. And that becomes challenging because you can get caught up in the culture of an organization that may not be very empathetic or inclusive. Stress levels, all of that kind of stuff can contribute to eroding even a personal agenda of trying to find a life work balance.
That's a great point. And you know what you're saying, and so I'm going to loop it back around to what you just said. There was an article that was done by Stanford University research. The gentleman's name is John, and I'm going to get his name, Pencalvo, Pen as in Nancy, Cav as in Victor, El. This was a 2014 article. And basically, what it was looking at is how many hours as an employee does everyone give before. Basically, they say you can't produce anything more. So you give so many hours as an employee and you simply cannot produce any more than what you can give, right? When I read this article several years ago and I reread it just recently, I thought to myself, this is interesting because now I took it a little bit further and thought to myself, well, how many hours as just human being do I have? At one point, regardless if I'm doing work, as you mentioned, if I have family, if I volunteer stuff, I can still only produce so many hours. And I like what
Hmm.
you just said. Basically, you said, which I think this article is saying, is that you have so many hours. So you have to look at it in buckets. I'll use the term buckets and figure out this month I may have to put a little bit more time here. This month I may have to put a little bit more time over here. You still have what I believe you said is that family's still going to be a priority, but you still have to kind of figure out how do I balance that monthly, weekly, daily, so you have a chance to look at that. And this is what this article is really saying is that everyone, we should be looking at everything we're doing and trying to find a balance, not just thinking that I can shut down work at a certain time. Look at everything holistically and
Yeah.
figure out where do you need to go at a certain time. And there's sometimes you may have to say, you know what? I need to spend more time at work for right now. Or maybe I need to spend more time with family, whatever it may be. So I really like what you just said. And this is just one of many articles. Just because one article and some research is done doesn't mean it's the right way, the only way. But again, it's one of many things. As you were talking, Dinez, I wrote down quickly, let's list all the things I do let's list all these volunteer work and my work. So obviously, I have my full time work at Edmonds College. I'm in this class, which is a LSG class. It's a leadership class. It's one Thursday a month, but it's all day. There's some stuff I do at Caltech. There's also AIM, there's CASE, there's Ivy, there's Loyola, and there's Northwestern.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, right? So, but it's not like I'm spending a lot of time even every month on it. There are little things that come up. There's sometimes things may be bunched together. For example, we just did that conference, WVDO. I always get the what is it?
Willamette Valley Development Officers.
Yes,
They have a new name,
we
though.
just did that, right? And we had to spend time
Yeah.
put the presentation together. You did bulk of the work, but we still
Yeah.
had to practice. We
Yeah.
had to get together, do the presentation. There was follow up. So all these things, and the things I just mentioned, that's not even about me as an individual. I mean, it is because I like doing those things, but I also like reading. I like spending time in a coffee shop and just relaxing. I like the walks and running I do. I like going to a movie or watching a TV show. So I got to
Yeah.
put that into it as well. Well, where does all this time
Yeah.
come together on? So I think what you just said and what this article is saying is let's look at all those things and let's
Yeah.
balance it together.
I I love that you are so involved in so many amazing organizations. So bravo to you for not just working in the space, but also giving back, and leading. And the work that you're doing too is impacting not just that organization, but the communities and the people that it serves. So thank you for your service. I think we don't recognize enough the service that a lot of nonprofit leaders give back to their own sector.
Thank you.
So that's really nice to hear. It is hard and challenging because there is so much, and it is hard to prioritize. But one thing that, in all the things you listed, if your engagement seems like education is very much a strong thread in not just your professional, but also in the external an extra work that you're doing. So education is a thread. So I can see how you want to read, you want to dedicate some of your interests into that. I could see how you really kind of lean into those types of organizations, but it is hard. So I want to ask you this. What if you're in a position, and this is probably something that might transition to our second part of our talk. What if you're in a position where you're like, uh oh, I've taken on more than I can manage? My commitment around a life work balance has now shifted into seeing this as more work and not prioritizing what is important to me, family, friends. What do you do in that instance? How do you say no? Or if you're already involved, how do you gracefully, professionally exit? Or is it just, you just got to put up with it? Like, where do you make those changes if you find that you're creating a cycle where work is defining so much of what you're doing, and these commitments now have taken you so far away from your personal agenda of shifting to a life work balance? How do you say no, or how do you get out of that when you're in that, and it's hard? So what have you done, or have you had to do that?
Yeah, I think about younger versus my age now. The younger days,
We're
it was
still
about
young.
learning, but it was also about my career, right?
We're still young.
We're still young, but definitely it was career building. I mean, we were less. I mean, at least for me, I can't talk for everyone. I said yes because I didn't know how to say no, but it was also about career building. If I'm saying yes, I'm networking. I'm getting to meet people. I'm getting into their networks, and I didn't even know I was doing this, but I was networking. And let's face it, that's how we somehow found new career paths, new jobs.
Yeah,
People saw what you're doing, and so there was a little part of you knew what you were doing, but a larger part of you didn't
definitely.
know the results it could, the benefits. So today, though, I think I'm saying no a lot more. But let's say that I am in that situation you just mentioned, and I didn't realize how much work it would take, or that I'm just overwhelmed now. I think what I've done in the past is if I'm working with this one organization and I realize I'm overwhelmed, I'll start to kind of pull back and I will let that person know, hey, look, I will stick with the organization, but I'm not going to take any extra stuff on within this organization. In other words, I'm not going to join all these different committees. I'm going to really stick with what I'm doing as the transition begins to happen. I've gotten much better to letting that person know that, okay, when my time is up, I'm going to step back. I'm going to step back. And it's interesting. That's easy for me to say now, but as the executive director, running organization, and I have a volunteer board, there are a number of volunteer members have come to me in previous jobs, and even this job has said I'm stepping back, and there is a part of me like, you cannot step back. I don't understand it, but I think I understand more better now. And what I mean by that, when someone goes, I need to step back, immediately I'll say, thank you so much. At least can you just help me transition this? Don't just quit. Your time ends here. Yes, and I make it much easier for
Definitely.
someone not to guilt them. I won't even say, "Well, can you help us find someone else?" I will allow them the grace to step back. I think we have to understand it as executive directors, or even if we're board chair, the pressure we're placing on someone by doing that because we wouldn't want it done to us.
That's a great point. Do unto
Yep.
others how you would
Yep.
wish done to you. Is that the saying? Yeah. I'm not great with those, but I think that's really as a leader modeling that, and responding that way, and so that when you're in that position to say, I need to step back, and stepping back looks like I may not be moving forward with future board meetings, those types of things. It is hard to say. I mean, I think, women in particular, and I don't like to generalize too much, but at least from my perspective, we often don't know how to say no. And setting those
Agreed.
boundaries, I think, is challenging. But in building your career, I've been in that position where I'm like, oh, I say yes to everything because it's about building that professional network, being able to be present. And then the other thing is like,
Hmm.
I even oftentimes feel like there's a lot of events that have been happening recently, and I'm not going to as many as I used to. And I oftentimes in the back of my head think, am I missing out? And the fear of missing out, is that going to continue to hurt because I want to do more consulting and more independent work? Is that going to prevent me from being seen
Mm,
and being on top of mind for others, for my ability to get more clients? So that also kind of sits at the back of my mind when I'm not attending, whether it's an industry specific event or some kind of conference. The back of my mind, I'm wondering if I'm missing out. And so that fear and that constant pressure of career development and networking can also overwhelm and impact also how you're prioritizing your life work balance. So that's a challenge too. I mean, there's the idea of like, okay, I've got to continue to build out my career, and if I'm prioritizing life work balance, what am I losing? What am I sacrificing? Am I missing out? And so that is also a challenging place to find yourself.
agreed. Agreed. There is an argument here. Argument, was it better pre-pandemic? And here's what I'm getting at. What I mean by that. When you left work, if you were on transportation or driving, there was a space that you had for yourself. If it took you an hour to drive or 30 minutes, or if you were even on public transportation, there was still a space to decompress. Before you went home to family or whatever you were going to, there was that space. And so, I've wondered, do people actually miss that space, that time to transition from home life to work? And so, or vice versa, going in the morning, as you said, you have a family, you got to set things up, but then you jumped in a car and drove, so you had that little space, or transportation. So I wonder about that. The other thing I'm going to bring up, I think, is when your office is a corner of your bedroom or your dining room table, like when this article I'm reading, it makes it hard to stop thinking about work when it's right there in the space. So now there is no transition. Your work has invaded your home in many ways. I'll call it fortress of solitude. I'm a huge Superman fan. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But it's your fortress of solitude from work. And let's face it, some people do bring work home before pre-pandemic. But now there is this merging, this blur. I think it's become easier to check emails now, to do that one more thing because it's right in your own home. It's harder to simply shut down. I've spoken to many friends that said they're on emails till 9 o'clock at night. And for them, they said it feels better when they can get through all their emails so they don't have to come into it to the next day. And I've often challenged them with it. I'm like, so you come in the next day, your emails are cleared up, but then it starts up again. So you're on emails until 9 o'clock at night the next day. So it's the same thing. So I guess saying that, do you believe, let's go back to my first thing. Do you believe that transition time, if you're on the bus, if you're driving, what do you think about what I said about that? Is it that people are missing that? I mean, there's no research out there I could find, but what are your thoughts about that? Was that a good thing?
That transition period, I think I do miss it, especially if you're working from home. It's like plugged in, plugged out. You don't give yourself that time to process. Winding down your day also doesn't happen when you're not going into a space. I think the part of uh, either continuing on to the next day or finishing up what you had to for that day, there's a winding down, at least I went through. It's like, okay, it's not just shutting down my computer. I would go around, check on my team, like, hey, is everyone leaving? Like, what are we working on? How do we wrap up our day? Let's do a check in. I don't have that anymore. Right now, I do a little bit with a place that I'm going into every day, which is really actually I do miss it. So I'll check in with team members like, okay, we'll just continue to work on it tomorrow, or we'll reconnect on Monday. So I do have that winding down again, and I actually during the pandemic I've really missed that because I oftentimes was like, oh, I'm physically unplugged,
Mm.
and wow, that was a heavy day. Wow, that was a little bit more of a toxic environment than I thought it would be. And so I didn't have that natural, like, just kind of shutting down for the day, prioritizing, and making my workload more manageable. When you leave it somewhere else, is a lot easier, I think, to prioritize life work balance. I'm trying to prioritize it more and more, But when you're working at home, when you don't have that winding down or that transition time to start thinking or to close off that day and shift into your life at home or wherever you're going, I miss that. And I think maybe others might miss that too. Do you miss that transition period?
Uh, well,
Or but
I
you're
go
going in
in
every day,
three.
right?
Yeah, I go down 3 days a week, 4 days a week. I usually work from home on Mondays because Mondays give me a chance to look at the week and to look at the past week. What are those things I haven't figured out? What are those things what's coming up? So I look at calendars. I start to move things around. I love Fridays. I go in, folks. I go in on Fridays. I love Fridays, and you know why? Because only one or two other people come in. It sounds terrible, but it's so great to go in on Fridays. I'll come in about 9, even 10 o'clock with some coffee, iced coffee, and I'll get there and I'll just go through my week. What haven't I done? It is quiet. I have room, space to think. There are a lot less emails, and I love finishing up whatever I didn't get through and pass out to the next week. I look at calendars. So driving in the morning, driving to work is a 20-minute drive. I have a reverse traffic. I love it. There's a ritual I have. I'll make coffee or I'll go get Starbucks, having it in my hands and then putting it in the cup holder, driving to work on the highway. I take the 5 and going north, listening to music. And sometimes I think about my day. It's just very relaxing
Hmm.
to me. So I enjoy that. Going home, the same thing. I enjoy that. And sometimes going home, I'll stop by a coffee shop. So, yes, that's how I
Yeah.
chill.
Well, you said you took your Monday off, so I'm just gonna, and we'll have to get some experts and others who are leading the 4-day work week initiative.
Mhm.
I think it's harder for the nonprofit space because whether we're in hospitals and schools and frontline essential nonprofit services, it's really kind of hard to operate that way. But the 4-day work week, that idea too, might contribute to how you're also present in your work and leans better into that life work balance, because the whole idea of the 4-day work week, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is not that you get that Monday off and then you're working from home, and but it's not 40 hours, right? It's like pushed into a 32 hour,
That's right.
4 days, and it's not taking, wow, you were doing it 40 hours, you now have to do it in 32 hours. I don't think that's what the intent is. The intent is to be more efficient in prioritizing what needs to get done, and so that there's a more efficient turnaround and there's more individuals connecting with each other, team members having more communication, because I think when you shift to that 32 hours, my understanding is people are creating more time as teams, more agile work functions. What is your take on, if
For
you were in an environment and as a leader, would you embrace the 4-day work week, or is it still you want to learn more about it?
No, so I just want to clarify that I'm actually, so when I say take off, I'm actually on the clock. So Mondays, I'm just working from home on Mondays. But you
Yeah,
did bring up a couple of points. What I picked up on, I decided to really pay attention for about a month, just writing down. So I always thought to myself, okay, I'm working from home on Mondays. I get up in the morning, I make myself something to eat. Okay, so I don't have that drive. I'll make myself
sure.
something to eat, do some work, and I'll get up about 10 o'clock and I'll take a walk down the street, 15-minute break, walk around, come back. For lunch, I'll go on a long walk, eating while I'm walking, listen to music, come back, and then maybe take another 15-minute break. Now, that's on Mondays. What I started picking up on is that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I wasn't doing that same pattern. But I can do that same pattern. And I didn't get up as much. Once I go into my office, unless I have a meeting, I'm sitting at my desk doing stuff. So I asked myself, why couldn't I do that in the workspace? There's something about the workspace I realized that told me that I had to sit at my desk and do this stuff. While at home, I felt a little bit more freedom to get up and take those breaks, to go for lunch. So I've gotten better. Once I kind of measured that out or paid attention to that for a month, I've gotten much better at walking away from my desk, definitely for lunch. I will definitely walk away from my desk. I'll have my Kindle book. I'll go into a conference space, but I get into a different space. And so that's what I do for lunch now. Now, for those little breaks, I'm starting to get better. It's still taking me some time, but I'm getting better at now just walking away from my desk. Some people have the smart watches that will beep and let them know to take a walk. I just remember at 10 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, I'm going to do something different. It could be, did I jump online and I look at something fun, or I'm going to walk, but I try to get out of workspace now. So that helped me. So that's one of my tips for today is like, if you can get into that, if you measure the stuff you're doing at home versus what you're doing at work and see if they're about the same thing, but your office environment, I think it pushes certain things on you that your home life, if you're working from home, you're not doing, but vice versa as well. So you got to just balance it yourself. So that's one thing. But you asked another question. The way I work with my team, I let them make their own decision. We have some goals for the week. We may have some goals for the month, the year, but I've told them and all the teams, yes, the leadership has said to us, this is how many times we want you to work in the office. I've shared that with my team, but I've also let them know if you need to take more time to do what you need to do it. We communicate, but do it. I support it. Just that's how it works.
That's
So I
great.
have a team member, for example, she loves coming in. She loves coming in every day. That's her thing. Another team member, she will work at home some days. Another team member, he will work some days at home, some days in the office. So anyway, yeah. So team members do different things. The one agreement is that we all have is on Mondays, we have a 30-minute touch base meeting that we all quickly jump online about 10 o'clock, like this is what's coming up for the week. On
Awesome.
Tuesdays, we have a face-to-face meeting. We all meet face-to-face for about an hour to 90 minutes.
Yep, I
Those
do
are the
that
two
too.
requirements. Yep.
Yeah, I do that Tuesdays
No.
too, and if I'm not there, someone else is not there, the meeting still happens.
Yep. The meeting still
Um,
happens. And then, of
yeah,
course, you have your one-on-ones, right? So
mhm,
that still
yeah,
happens too.
yeah. It's definitely, a really important topic as more and more what I'm finding is, you know, people are leaving jobs though, and they're looking for that either, I don't want to say hybrid, but they're looking for more remote work. And so, as more of that becomes a driving force for people, especially in the nonprofit space, a lot of nonprofits can't have people remote all the time. Not a lot of positions can be,
Yeah.
and not a lot of
Yes.
positions can be a 4-day work week. And so, just to be equitable
Agreed.
with all the different types of jobs, hourly and exempt, for an organization, and to create more collaborative and inclusive cultures for nonprofits, I think it's going to be a little bit more work to explore how a 4-day work week impacts a nonprofit. Funding deadlines also make it challenging to be a 4-day work week, just because deadlines can happen at any time. And, events are another challenge for some nonprofits to move and shift into a 4-day work week. So, but we'll definitely have more people, and if you want to talk about how maybe your nonprofit is shifting to a 4-day work week or has successfully shifted to one, or if you have a need to share how you're embracing work life balance and how your organization has shifted also into a life work balance, what that looks like, and how you model that for yourself and for your team, please join us. So, Tom, I think we'll wrap up our session.
Yeah.
This probably be a two-part session as always, but great conversation.
Great. And I would love to share with the audience if you can send us tips. What do you do to balance your life? We already talked about doing the columns. Here's one tip: write the list of those things that you're working on, how many hours, rank them, and then write in the second column those things that are important to rank them and see if they're matching up. That was one tip. I want to give one other tip that a friend said to me. I'm like, when she's on vacation, she will look at her emails for 30 minutes, even when she's on vacation. She said for her, and she does it just 30 minutes in the morning and she tries to respond. She said by the time she gets back to her work, it feels so much better because all those emails aren't sitting there. I've begun to use those tips with the exception of the weekends, but if I'm on vacation, I'll do that. So those are just some recommendations. You may have little tips that you do. If you can send us all, respond to us, let us know what your tips are that found peace in your life. Dennis, you have at least one tip recommendation.
My tip is to say yes to adventure.
I love
So
it,
if the
of course.
adventure, as Tom has kind of put that out there, and I embrace that now. Saying yes to adventure is one way to start really identifying how you can prioritize life, work balance. And when you prioritize and find joy in the things that fulfill and add to the quality of life you have, I think you're going to be a better colleague and leader and more effective and impactful in the work that you're doing, especially in the nonprofit space. So, say yes to
That's
adventure
really
would
good.
be how I think you can start taking steps to identify that life work balance and how it works for you. Because, as we
Nice.
know,
Nicely said.
right, Tom? Because
We've
we've
been
been
in
in
your
your shoes.
shoes. That's right. Right. So thank you, audience. Hope this was helpful to you. Again, share your tips, share your experience with us.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
Join us next time as we share, advocate, and highlight experiences and ideals from nonprofit colleagues, leaders, and champions.
Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes.